It was supposed to be just another routine flight. The passengers boarded, the crew prepared for takeoff, and everything seemed normal until one flight attendant made a decision that would change everything. When Captain Monica Carter, a highly skilled, decorated pilot, attempted to enter the cockpit, she was stopped in her tracks. Suspicion, whispers, and doubt spread through the cabin. Some questioned her authority. Others doubted her ability. And one determined businessman saw an opportunity to turn the entire flight against her. But what they didn't realize was that Monica wasn't alone. Among the passengers sat a man who had been watching, listening, waiting. A man whose identity, once revealed, would bring everything to a shocking standstill. What started as a simple act of discrimination quickly spiraled into a battle for control at 35,000 feet. And by the time the plane touched down, no one on board would ever see the world the same way again. Who really holds the power? Who gets to decide who belongs? And when the truth finally comes out, who will be left standing? Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories like this one. And let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The airport buzzed with its usual chaos, announcements blaring, rolling suitcases clicking against the polished floors, impatient travelers checking their watches. Monica Carter adjusted the cuff of her crisp navy uniform, her polished black heels clicking with confidence as she approached the boarding gate. She could already feel the eyes on her. It wasn't the first time. A black female pilot wasn't common, and it was something she had long since learned to ignore. Beside her, James Carter walked in calm silence. Her husband of 10 years, dressed in casual khakis and a leather jacket, blended into the crowd like any other traveler. He wasn't flashy. He never needed to be. As they approached the gate, a middle-aged white man in a business suit cut them a glance. Monica saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes before he muttered to his wife, "She's just playing dress-up." Monica didn't flinch. James, however, glanced at the man, his face unreadable. They handed over their tickets. The flight attendant at the counter, a young blonde woman named Lisa, smiled at James, but hesitated when she saw Monica. Her eyes flicked to Monica's pilot wings, then back to her face. "You must be mistaken," Lisa said, forcing a smile. "This is the priority boarding line for crew." Monica exhaled slowly. "I know." Lisa's eyebrows lifted slightly, as if expecting Monica to back down. Instead, Monica reached into her pocket and pulled out her ID badge. "Captain Monica Carter, pilot of this flight." Lisa's smile faded. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, trying to recover, she forced out a nervous chuckle. "Oh, I see. Just a security precaution, you understand. You can't be too careful these days." Monica said nothing. James, standing beside her, studied Lisa's reaction. He had spent years observing people, noting the way their eyes shifted, the way their voices changed. Lisa wasn't just surprised. She was bothered. Monica took her ID back, nodded to James, and continued down the jet bridge. But as she stepped onto the plane, a voice behind her stopped her cold. "Excuse me, ma'am," Lisa called, stepping forward. "I need to ask you to wait here." Monica turned slowly. "Why?" Lisa's smile was tight. "I need to check with the captain." Monica tilted her head. "I am the captain." Lisa hesitated. Then, clearing her throat, she looked around as if searching for backup. "I mean, the head pilot," she corrected quickly. "The senior captain." The cabin fell quiet. Passengers turned in their seats, watching. The business suit man from earlier smirked. Monica took a step forward. "I am the senior captain. The head pilot. The one who's going to fly this plane." Lisa opened her mouth, then shut it. The businessman scoffed. "Unbelievable," he muttered. Monica turned toward the cockpit, but Lisa moved in front of her, blocking her way. "I can't let you in," Lisa said, her voice firmer now. Monica arched an eyebrow. "And why is that?" Lisa folded her arms. "Passengers aren't allowed in the cockpit." James let out a low breath. Monica clenched her jaw. The whispers grew louder. Then, from the cockpit, another voice cut through the tension. Carter. A man appeared in the doorway. A tall, broad-shouldered figure in a pilot's uniform, silver hair neatly combed back. Captain Roger Dawson. He took one look at the scene, then turned to Lisa. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded. Lisa blinked. "I was just..." Dawson's face darkened. "Do you know who she is?" Lisa swallowed hard. Monica held Dawson's gaze. "I believe we have a flight to run." Dawson nodded. "Welcome aboard, Captain." The entire plane went silent. Lisa's face drained of color. The businessman paled. Monica gave Lisa one last glance before stepping past her into the cockpit. But as she did, she heard a hushed voice behind her. "That's not right," the businessman muttered. "There's no way she's qualified." James finally spoke, calmly, evenly. "Do you know who my wife is?" The businessman turned, scowling. "No, and I don't care." James smiled. It was not a warm smile. "Then, maybe," he said quietly, "you should pay attention." He took his seat. Monica closed the cockpit door behind her. And the flight was only just beginning. Lisa stood frozen in the aisle, her face stiff with forced composure. The murmurs of the passengers rippled through the cabin like an approaching storm. She had thought she was doing her job, enforcing protocol, but now she was at the center of something much bigger. Monica Carter had entered the cockpit. The business class passengers exchanged wary glances, their assumptions hanging in the air like unspoken accusations. Lisa turned back toward the front of the plane, locking eyes with Mike, the senior flight attendant. He had been watching from the galley, his expression unreadable. Without a word, she hurried over. "She can't be the captain," Lisa whispered urgently. "I've never seen a black female captain before." "Have you?" Mike's lips pressed into a thin line. "Doesn't mean she doesn't exist." Lisa huffed. "Something feels off." Mike studied her for a long moment before sighing. "Lisa, listen to me carefully. If she says she's the captain, then she's the captain. You're walking a very fine line right now." Lisa swallowed hard. But her gut told her something was wrong. And she wasn't the only one who thought so. In row 5, the businessman who had mocked Monica earlier leaned toward the man beside him, a graying executive in an expensive navy suit. "This doesn't sit right," he muttered. "I mean, come on. You saw the way they acted. That guy her husband? He's too calm. And she just walks onto the plane like she owns it? Something's off." The executive shrugged. "Maybe she's just that good." The businessman scoffed. "Or maybe she's lying." A woman too rose back, overhearing, sighed loudly. "You guys do realize that black women can be pilots, right?" The businessman turned, frowning. "I'm just saying, we should know who's flying this plane." Inside the cockpit, Monica slid into her seat with practiced ease, fingers brushing over the controls. She had spent her life in cockpits, first as a young cadet in flight school, then as a decorated Air Force pilot, and now as one of the most respected captains in commercial aviation. She knew what she was doing, but outside this cockpit, she was still a challenge to people's perceptions. Dawson, the co-pilot, glanced at her. "I apologize for that mess out there," he muttered. "Some people can't accept change." Monica gave a small smile. "Not my first time dealing with it." Dawson exhaled sharply. "Well, they're in for a hell of a surprise." Underscore 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 underscore. Back in the cabin, Lisa reached for the intercom, her thoughts racing. What if Monica really wasn't supposed to be here? What if she had forced her way into the cockpit? Her fingers hesitated over the button. Then came the voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." Monica's smooth, professional tone filled the cabin. Welcome aboard Flight 227, traveling nonstop to Washington, D.C. We're expecting smooth skies and a pleasant ride. Please fasten your seatbelts as we prepare for takeoff. A beat of silence. Then a wave of murmurs. Some passengers looked at one another, still unsure what to believe. Lisa felt her stomach drop. There was no mistaking that voice. No hesitation. No uncertainty. It was the voice of a leader. Still, doubt gnawed at her. She turned toward Mike, her voice low. "I'm calling security." Mike's eyes widened. "Lisa, don't too late." She picked up the internal phone and dialed airport security. "This is Lisa Henderson, flight attendant on Flight 227, she whispered. "I need verification on the identity of our captain. Something isn't right." On the other end, a pause. Then understood. "We'll send someone immediately." Lisa hung up, her hands trembling slightly. She had just set something in motion, and once it started there would be no stopping it. The engines rumbled to life beneath them, a deep mechanical hum vibrating through the aircraft as Flight 227 prepared for takeoff. Inside the cockpit, Monica ran through her pre-flight checklist with calm efficiency, but a flicker of frustration danced behind her eyes. She had dealt with doubt before. Racism and sexism in aviation were nothing new. But outright resistance from her own crew? That was a different level of obstruction. Dawson, sitting beside her, noticed her clenched jaw. "Lisa called security," he murmured, barely moving his lips. Monica exhaled slowly. "I figured." Dawson sighed. "Want me to handle it?" "No," Monica said, adjusting a dial. "Let's see how far they take this." The cockpit door was locked now, the world outside muffled, but she knew something was brewing beyond it. In the cabin, Lisa sat stiffly in the jump seat near the front, sneaking glances toward the jet bridge. Any moment now, security would arrive. She had done what she had to do. A quiet voice interrupted her thoughts. "You should have thought twice before making that call." Lisa turned, startled. It was Mike, the senior flight attendant, arms crossed, eyes filled with disappointment. "I don't know what you think." "You're proving," he continued, keeping his voice low so passengers wouldn't overhear. "But you crossed a line." Lisa bristled. "I'm doing my job." "No," Mike corrected. "You're letting your biases make decisions for you." Lisa's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, the forward cabin door swung open. A uniformed security officer stepped inside, scanning the plane. He was middle-aged, sharp-eyed, with the no-nonsense demeanor of a man who had seen his fair share of mid-air meltdowns. "Who called this in?" the officer asked. Lisa stood. "I did." "There's an issue with the captain." The officer frowned. "What kind of issue?" Lisa hesitated. Now that she had to put it into words, it sounded ridiculous. She boarded without proper verification," Lisa said. "I've never seen her before. I just wanted to make sure she's actually the captain." The officer's gaze darkened. "Let me get this straight. You called airport security because you weren't comfortable with your own captain?" Lisa flushed. "I was just following protocol." The officer gave a slow nod, then pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, confirm Flight 227's pilot in command." A few seconds later, the response crackled through. "Captain Monica Carter. Fully cleared. Seniority confirmed. Proceed with flight." Lisa's stomach dropped. Mike let out a quiet scoff. "Well, that settles it." The officer clipped his radio back onto his belt. Then, leveling a cold stare at Lisa, he stepped closer. "You wasted my time," he said bluntly. "And you insulted a decorated pilot. I suggest you sit down and rethink your career choices." Lisa's face burned, but she said nothing. The officer turned on his heel and left the plane. A few rows back, the businessman who had doubted Monica watched everything unfold. He leaned toward his seatmate, whispering, "Well, this is awkward." The executive beside him chuckled. "Yeah, and we haven't even taken off yet." Back in the cockpit, Monica and Dawson received clearance from air traffic control. Tower to Flight 227. You're clear for departure. Monica nodded. Copy that. She reached for the throttle. Then, her headset crackled again. Flight 227. Be advised there's been a passenger complaint regarding the crew. Do you require additional security? Monica's eyes narrowed. Someone on this plane still wasn't done causing trouble. She glanced at Dawson. Did you hear that? Dawson smirked. I did. Monica exhaled, shaking her head. Let's just get in the air before someone tries to ground us. With a steady hand, she pushed the throttle forward. The engines roared, and Flight 227 lifted into the sky. The aircraft soared into the sky, its ascent smooth despite the turbulence brewing within the cabin. Monica kept her hands steady on the controls, her eyes trained on the instruments in front of her. 35,000 feet up, but the real storm was inside the plane. Dawson let out a low chuckle beside her. I've flown through hurricanes with less tension than this. Monica smirked. Welcome to being a black woman in aviation. Dawson shook his head. I don't get it. If you're sitting in this seat, it means you've proven yourself 100 times over. What's it going to take for people to just let you fly the damn plane? Monica exhaled, adjusting a switch. Honestly, probably another 50 years. Dawson sighed, rubbing his temple. Well, at least we're in the air now. No one can stop you up here. Monica didn't respond, because she knew that wasn't true. Lisa sat rigid in her jump seat, her hands gripping the edge of the cushion so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had lost. She had called security, questioned the captain, and been proven wrong all in front of an entire plane full of passengers. And now, she could feel their eyes on her. The humiliation burned in her chest. Mike, the senior flight attendant, leaned toward her. Now that you've completely embarrassed yourself, maybe you should focus on your actual job. Lisa glared at him. You think this is over? Mike frowned. I think it should be, but something tells me you're about to make it worse. Lisa's fingers twitched. She wasn't done, and neither was someone else. In row 5, the businessman who had been muttering about Monica earlier glanced toward the aisle, then leaned over to whisper to his seatmate. I think we should report her, he said. The executive next to him sighed. Oh, give it a rest. No, think about it, the businessman pressed. The flight attendant called security for a reason. The pilot might have credentials, but something still feels off. The executive scoffed. You're reaching. The businessman shook his head. I'm not comfortable. And if I'm not comfortable, that means other people aren't either. She's a risk. The executive raised an eyebrow. She's a risk? I'm just saying, the executive turned in his seat. Excuse me, he called toward a flight attendant walking down the aisle. The young flight attendant paused. Yes, sir? The businessman sat up straighter. I'd like to file a formal complaint about the pilot. The attendant frowned. On what grounds? She's making people uncomfortable, the businessman said smoothly. The executive beside him rolled his eyes. The flight attendant hesitated. He had heard the announcement. He had seen security confirm her identity. But this was a first-class passenger, and airline policy dictated that all concerns had to be documented. Sir, I can take your complaint, the attendant said carefully, but Captain Carter has been cleared. I still want it on record, the businessman insisted. Lisa, still seated at the front, overheard every word. Her pulse quickened. Maybe she wasn't alone in her concerns. Maybe she had an ally. She unbuckled her harness, stood up, and made her way to row 5. Monica adjusted the altitude and sat back slightly, finally allowing herself to settle. Dawson checked the system monitors and nodded. Everything's running smoothly. You want coffee? Monica chuckled. You're reading my mind. Dawson reached for the intercom and paged the flight attendants. Cabin crew, this is your co-pilot. We'd love some caffeine up here. A moment later, Lisa's voice crackled through. Copy that, Captain. Monica's eyebrows lifted. Lisa? Dawson frowned. That's interesting. Monica's gut told her something was off. Lisa wouldn't be so quick to cooperate. Not after everything. And she was right to be suspicious. Because at that moment, Lisa was speaking with the businessman in row 5. And together, they were about to make their next move. Lisa stood next to the businessman in row 5, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She had just made a fool of herself by calling security, but now she had support. I completely understand your concern, sir, Lisa said smoothly, lowering her voice so only he and his seatmate could hear. You're not the only passenger who feels uncomfortable. The businessman smirked. I knew it. A pilot like that? It's just, he waved vaguely, as if searching for the right word. It doesn't feel safe. The executive sitting next to him scoffed. You both sound ridiculous. Lisa ignored him, leaning in. Technically, passenger complaints are taken very seriously. If enough people raise concerns, the airline has to review them. The businessman's eyes gleamed. So, what are you saying? Lisa hesitated. She hadn't fully thought this through. She had already failed once in trying to get Monica removed. If she pushed too hard now, she could face real consequences. But the businessman was already a step ahead. He turned to the passengers in the surrounding seats and raised his voice just slightly. Excuse me, he said, sounding perfectly polite. Has anyone else noticed that our pilot was almost stopped? From boarding? Heads turned. Passengers looked at one another, curious. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong, he continued, tone oh so reasonable. But when was the last time you saw a pilot get questioned before takeoff? Some passengers nodded slowly. Lisa saw an opening. If anyone feels uncomfortable, she said, you have every right to make that known. A woman in the aisle seat frowned. Uncomfortable about what? Lisa spread her hands innocently. I'm not saying there's an issue, but if you have concerns, we're happy to document them. The businessman grinned. We should absolutely document them. Dawson sighed as he leaned back in his seat. Coffee's taking a while. Monica didn't respond. She was thinking. Something wasn't right. Lisa's voice over the intercom had sounded too controlled, too eager. Not like someone who just got proven wrong. Monica adjusted the heading. I've got a bad feeling. Dawson smirked. You had a bad feeling before we even took off. Monica shot him a look. And was I wrong? Dawson held up his hands in surrender. Fair point. A chime rang through the cockpit. Someone at the cabin door. Monica flipped the intercom. Who is it? Lisa's voice came through. Too smooth. Captain, I have your coffee. Dawson reached for the release switch, but Monica put a hand over his. Wait. Dawson frowned. What? Monica stared at the door, her instinct screaming. Lisa wasn't coming just to deliver coffee. The businessman watched as Lisa walked toward the cockpit, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. He turned to the passengers still watching. If something goes wrong on this flight, remember we ask questions first. A few murmurs of agreement spread through the cabin. Not outright protest. Not yet. But doubt had been planted. And at 35,000 feet, doubt could be just as dangerous as a storm. Lisa reached the cockpit door and knocked twice. Inside, Monica took a deep breath. She wasn't afraid, but she was ready, and whatever came next she would handle it. Lisa stood at the cockpit door, balancing a tray with 2 cups of coffee. Her heart pounded, but she kept her expression neutral. She wasn't just delivering drinks, she was delivering doubt. Inside the cockpit, Monica and Dawson exchanged a look. The moment felt heavier than it should have. It was just coffee. But after everything that had happened, Monica knew better than to ignore her instincts. Dawson exhaled. This is ridiculous. It's coffee, Monica. Monica hesitated for only a second before nodding. Dawson flipped the security release switch, unlocking the door. Lisa stepped in. The cockpit was cool, dimly lit except for the soft glow of the instrument panels. The quiet hum of the aircraft surrounded them. Lisa placed the tray down on the center console, her movements precise, controlled. "Your coffee," she said smoothly. Dawson grabbed his cup without hesitation, but Monica? She just watched Lisa. There was something about the way she was standing, a tension in her shoulders, a hesitation in her breath. Lisa wasn't here just to serve coffee. She was here to push something. Lisa folded her hands in front of her. "Captain, may I speak freely?" Monica arched an eyebrow. "Depends. Are you about to accuse me of stealing my own cockpit again?" Dawson choked on his coffee. Lisa's lips pressed into a thin line. "I just think it's important to listen to passengers. Some of them are uneasy." Monica leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Uneasy about what?" Lisa hesitated, then carefully chose her words. "They don't feel comfortable with this situation." Monica tilted her head. "Define this situation." Lisa shifted. "They don't feel reassured." Monica let out a slow breath. There it was. "They're uncomfortable because I'm black." Lisa flinched. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to," Monica said. Dawson put his cup down, rubbing his temple. "Jesus." Lisa straightened her spine. "Captain, I'm just relaying passenger concerns." Monica held her gaze. "No, you're justifying them." Lisa's jaw clenched. "Passengers are allowed to voice concerns." Monica nodded. "And I'm allowed to tell them that their concerns are based on ignorance." Lisa blinked, clearly thrown off. Monica leaned forward. Her voice was calm, controlled, but powerful. "You called security on me. You accused me of not belonging in my own cockpit. And now, when you've been proven wrong, instead of apologizing, you're trying to turn this into a passenger concern issue." Lisa opened her mouth, but Monica didn't let her speak. "You and I both know what's happening here," Monica continued. "You just didn't expect me to push back." Lisa swallowed hard. Monica didn't look away. "You're dismissed, Henderson." Lisa's face burned. For a second, she didn't move. Then, with a stiff nod, she turned and left the cockpit, the door locking behind her. Dawson let out a low whistle. "Well," he muttered, "that was something." Monica exhaled. "She's not done." Dawson frowned. "You think she's going to pull something else?" Monica tightened her grip on the controls. "I don't think." She knew, because Lisa wasn't just fighting for her own ego anymore. She had allies now, and at 35,000 feet there was only so much room for control. One wrong move and things could spiral fast. Lisa stormed out of the cockpit, her face hot with frustration. Passengers were still watching her, their eyes flicking between her and the locked cockpit door. She didn't care. She had just been humiliated. Captain Carter had shut her down again. But Lisa wasn't backing down. Not when she knew she wasn't the only one who had doubts. She walked briskly toward row 5, where the businessman sat, smirking as if he had already won. His executive seatmate, however, was shaking his head. "Got what you wanted," the executive muttered. The businessman ignored him and leaned toward Lisa. "Well?" Lisa folded her arms. "She dismissed my concerns." The businessman scoffed. "Of course she did. That's what people like her do." Lisa tensed. She wasn't sure what he meant by people like her. But before she could question it, the businessman leaned back, raising his voice slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the surrounding rows, "it's clear that our concerns are being ignored. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but I believe passenger safety should be the priority here." A few passengers turned their heads. The businessman smiled, calm and collected. "I don't want to alarm anyone, but something about this situation isn't right. A pilot nearly stopped before boarding? A flight attendant calling security on her own captain? I think we all have a right to ask questions." Lisa watched carefully. He was planting doubt, and it was working. A woman in row 7 frowned. So, are you saying the pilot isn't supposed to be here? I'm just saying, the businessman said smoothly. If there's even the smallest possibility of a mistake, wouldn't you want to know? Another passenger muttered. We're already in the air. What are we supposed to do about it? The businessman's smirk deepened. There's always a way to correct mistakes, he said. Lisa felt a chill crawl up her spine. She had thought she was in control of this. But now, she wasn't so sure. Monica adjusted the autopilot, keeping her hand steady. The aircraft hummed smoothly beneath her touch, but her gut told her something wasn't right. Dawson was flipping through the flight manifest. I checked the logs, he muttered. Business class guy in row 5? Name's Charles Whitmore. Works in corporate law. Monica arched an eyebrow. And Dawson exhaled. He's got a reputation for stirring the pot. Likes filing complaints. Thinks rules don't apply to him. Monica tightened her grip on the controls. Of course. She had dealt with men like him before. The kind who thought authority belonged to them. The kind who pushed boundaries just to see how much they could get away with. Dawson sighed. He's been whispering to the flight attendants since takeoff. You think he's up to something? Monica didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached for the intercom. Cabin crew, this is your captain. Everything running smoothly back there. A pause. Then, Mike's voice came through. Actually, Captain, we might have a problem. Monica and Dawson exchanged a glance. Dawson muttered, told you. Monica picked up the receiver. What kind of problem? A beat. Then a passenger revolt kind of problem. Monica's blood ran cold. Dawson let out a slow, impressed whistle. That was fast. Monica set her jaw. Not fast enough. Because if things were already escalating, that meant she had even less time than she thought. And at 35,000 feet, time was everything. Monica tightened her grip on the intercom. Mike, explain. The senior flight attendant's voice came through, low and tense. We've got passengers talking about you. A pause. And not in a good way. Dawson raised an eyebrow. That's vague. Spell it out. Mike exhaled sharply. Business class guy Charles Whitmore is stirring people up. He's got a handful of them whispering about whether this flight is safe under your command. Monica closed her eyes briefly, willing down her frustration. They wanted her out. Dawson muttered, this is absurd. Mike's voice returned, quieter now. Captain, it's not just talk anymore. A couple of them are saying if enough passengers demand a leadership change, the airline is obligated to listen. Monica's stomach dropped. Dawson let out a low, bitter chuckle. Oh, come on. They're not actually trying to stage a mutiny, are they? Mike hesitated. I think they might be. Monica exhaled, leaning back in her seat. This was spiraling faster than she anticipated. They weren't questioning her qualifications anymore. They were questioning her right to be here at all. And at 35,000 feet, she had nowhere to go. Whitmore leaned back in his seat, watching his work unfold with quiet satisfaction. The murmurs were spreading. Doubt was infectious. The woman in row 7 hesitated before speaking. If we say we're uncomfortable, what happens? Whitmore smiled. It depends. But the airline always prioritizes passenger safety. The man beside her frowned. How do we even report something like this? Whitmore's grin widened. Simple. He turned, raising a hand to call over a flight attendant. Lisa. She approached cautiously, glancing around the cabin. Some passengers were watching closely now. Lisa bent down slightly. What do you need, sir? Whitmore kept his voice low, but firm. I want to file a formal concern about the pilot. Lisa hesitated. She had started this, but was she really ready to go this far? Whitmore pressed on. You said earlier that if enough passengers express concern, the airline has to take action. Lisa swallowed. I did say that, but so let's make it happen. Whitmore cut in smoothly. Lisa looked around, suddenly realizing how many eyes were on her. She had a choice now. Push forward. or step back. And stepping back would mean admitting she had been wrong from the start. Her pulse pounded. Then a deep voice interrupted the moment. "I wouldn't do that. If I were you." Lisa turned, startled. James Carter had stood up. Mike's voice crackled over the intercom again. Captain? I think your husband just made his move." Monica froze. Dawson blinked. "Wait, your husband is on this flight?" Monica sighed. "He prefers to blend in." Dawson smirked. "Well, I think blending is officially over." Monica flipped the intercom switch. "Tell me exactly what he's doing." Mike let out a low whistle. "He just stood up," Mike muttered. "And I gotta tell you, Captain, he does not look happy." James Carter stood with an unreadable expression, his hands casually in his pockets. But his sharp, assessing eyes, were locked onto Whitmore. Lisa instinctively stepped back. Whitmore frowned. "And who are you supposed to be?" James tilted his head slightly. "That's an interesting question." Whitmore scoffed. "Look, if you don't like what's happening, sit down. The passengers have the right to express concerns." James smirked. "You're absolutely right." Whitmore's expression shifted slightly, something uneasy flickering behind his confidence. James glanced at the passengers around them. "And I have the right to express concerns, too." Lisa swallowed. Something about the way he said that made the air feel heavier. Whitmore folded his arms. "Oh yeah? And what exactly are you concerned about?" James gave a slow, knowing smile. "Who I work for." Whitmore's confidence cracked. Lisa's breath hitched. Passengers exchanged glances. Mike, standing near the galley, whispered under his breath, "Oh, damn." Because James Carter had just changed the entire game. And nobody, even Lisa, had seen it coming. The cabin fell silent. Lisa froze. Whitmore's smirk faltered. "And who do you work for exactly?" he asked, forcing a casual tone. James Carter tilted his head slightly, still wearing that calm, knowing smirk. "I'd be careful how you phrase that." Lisa felt the shift in the air. Passengers who had been murmuring now sat rigidly in their seats, eyes darting between Whitmore and James. Even those who had been quietly agreeing with Whitmore now looked uncertain. Something about James felt different. Whitmore let out a scoffing laugh. "What? Are you an air marshal or something?" James took his time before answering. Then, with deliberate ease, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge. A government-issued badge. Homeland Security. Lisa sucked in a sharp breath. Passengers gasped. Even Whitmore's face drained of color. James studied him. "Want to ask me again who I work for?" Whitmore did not. Lisa's throat felt dry. Homeland Security. James Carter wasn't just some passenger. He was a high-ranking official in the very agency responsible for handling aviation threats. And he had been watching everything. Mike's stunned voice crackled through the intercom. Captain, your husband just flashed a Homeland Security badge." Dawson choked on his coffee. "What?" Monica sighed, rubbing her temple. "Yeah," she muttered. "That sounds like him." Dawson stared. "Wait, your husband works for Homeland Security? And you just casually let that happen?" Monica gave him a look. "What was I supposed to do? Announce over the intercom that my husband outranks half the security agencies in the country?" Dawson let out a low whistle. "Well, that explains why he was so calm." Monica took a steadying breath. "Tell me, what's Whitmore doing?" Mike's awestruck voice came through. "I think he's trying to disappear into his seat." Monica smirked. "Good." Then she unbuckled her harness. "Where are you going?" Dawson asked. Monica flipped the security switch, unlocking the cockpit door. "To clean up this mess," she said. Whitmore was still staring at James's badge, his earlier arrogance gone. Lisa was reeling. She had thought she was back in control. She had thought Whitmore was the strongest voice in the room, but she had been wrong. James slid the badge back into his jacket. "Here's how this is going to go," he said smoothly. "You're going to sit quietly. You're going to stop spreading panic. And you're going to let this flight land without incident. Whitmore swallowed hard. James leaned in slightly. Not threatening, just certain. But if you decide to keep running your mouth, James continued, I'd be happy to explain to the FAA how you tried to incite panic on a federal aircraft. Whitmore's hands curled into fists. I wasn't. James raised an eyebrow. Weren't you? Whitmore shut up. The businessman who had been so smug minutes ago now looked like he wanted to disappear into his seat. Passengers whispered among themselves, the earlier doubt shifting into something else entirely. Lisa felt a pit in her stomach. She had miscalculated. Badly. Then a new voice cut through the tension. Is there a problem here? Lisa turned, heart dropping. Captain Monica Carter stood in the aisle, and she was done playing games. Monica took her time looking around the cabin. Passengers averted their eyes when she met their gazes. She didn't need to ask what had been happening. She already knew. Her eyes landed on Lisa. Then Whitmore. Neither spoke. Monica folded her arms. You've got about 5 seconds to explain why you think a pilot approved by the FAA, cleared by airport security, and currently flying this aircraft isn't qualified to do her job. Lisa flushed. Captain, Monica cut her off. No. We're done with excuses. Whitmore, still pale, shrunk back. Monica shook her head. You played a stupid game. And guess what? You lost. Lisa dropped her gaze. Monica exhaled sharply. I suggest you all stay in your seats and enjoy the rest of this flight, she said flatly. Because this conversation is over. Silence. Then a slow clap. A woman near the front of the cabin started clapping. Then another, and another, until half the plane was applauding. Lisa's face burned with humiliation. Whitmore clenched his jaw. And Monica? She just turned calmly and walked back toward the cockpit. James met her gaze as she passed. Nicely done. Monica smirked. You too. She disappeared back into the cockpit, the door locking behind her. Whitmore sat silently, staring at the seat in front of him. Lisa, humiliated, slipped away toward the galley. The storm had passed, and Captain Monica Carter was still in command. The applause faded into a steady hush, but its impact still lingered in the air. Passengers exchanged glances, some embarrassed, some relieved. Whatever doubts had been stirring before were now buried beneath certainty. Monica Carter was their captain. Lisa sat stiffly in the galley, her mind racing. She had spent the entire flight pushing back, trying to justify her own discomfort. But now she was the outsider. She had lost. And she knew it. Across the cabin, Whitmore sat rigid, his jaw tight with frustration. He had been so sure he could control the narrative, bend the situation in his favor. But that badge, James Carter's badge, had shattered everything. No one would listen to him now. Lisa risked a glance toward James, who had returned to his seat, calm as ever. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't smirking. He was simply watching. Not her. The plane. The people. Everything. As if he was still calculating the risks. Still making sure nothing else spiraled out of control. Lisa shivered. She had been so focused on Monica. She had completely misjudged her husband. And now she was alone in this. Monica settled back into her seat, adjusting the throttle less. They began their descent. Dawson was grinning. I gotta be honest, he said, shaking his head. That was fun to watch. Monica let out a slow breath. Glad someone enjoyed it. Dawson chuckled. Come on, Carter. You just shut down an attempted mutiny mid-flight. That's legendary. Monica smirked. You think I'll put that in the flight logs? Dawson laughed. I'd pay to see it. A voice crackled through the radio. Flight 227, this is DC Tower. You're cleared for landing on runway 37. Monica pressed the comm button. Copy that, tower. Beginning final approach. Dawson adjusted a few dials, nodding. Let's bring this bird home. Monica focused. Whatever had happened in the cabin, it didn't matter now. All that mattered was landing safely. She had a job to do, and she was going to do it flawlessly. The voice over the intercom was clear and steady. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are beginning our final descent into Washington, D.C. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened and your tray tables are in their upright positions. Passengers settled down, shifting in their seats. The earlier tension had evaporated, replaced by the familiar routine of landing. Lisa exhaled shakily. It was over. She should have felt relieved. But instead, all she felt was exposed. She had spent so much time trying to undermine Monica, and for what? Now, the entire plane knew what she had done. And worse, they sided with Monica. Lisa swallowed hard, her hands tightening around the jump seat straps. This wasn't just a professional failure. This was personal, and she didn't know if she could come back from it. The wheels touched down smoothly, barely a jolt as the aircraft glided along the runway. A perfect landing. Dawson let out a satisfied sigh. Textbook. Monica smirked. You expected anything less? Dawson grinned. Not even a little. The aircraft taxied to the gate, and the seatbelt signs flicked off. A ripple of movement filled the cabin as passengers grabbed their bags and prepared to disembark. Monica stretched slightly, feeling the weight of the flight settle into her muscles. It had been a long day, but she had won. As she and Dawson completed their post-flight checks, the cockpit door swung open. James leaned inside. Monica raised an eyebrow. You gonna critique my landing? James smirked. Wouldn't dare. But I figured I'd let you know you're fan. Club is waiting outside. Monica chuckled. Fan club? James jerked his chin toward the cabin. Half the passengers want to thank you. The other half just want to shake your hand. Monica exhaled. Great. Dawson grinned. Told you. Legendary. Monica unbuckled and followed James out. The moment she stepped into the aisle, she felt the shift. Passengers smiled at her. A woman in business class murmured, "Thank you for proving them wrong." A man in first class offered a respectful nod. Even some of the people who had doubted her now looked ashamed of themselves. And then, as she passed by row 5, she met Whitmore's gaze. The businessman said nothing. No smug smirk. No sharp remarks. Just silence. Because he knew he had lost. Monica gave him a small, knowing smile. Then she walked on. She had a flight to prepare for tomorrow. Because no matter what people thought, no matter what they tried, she was still the captain. And nothing would ever change that. Lisa waited until the plane was empty. She stood near the exit, staring at the empty rows, replaying the flight in her mind. The doubt, the humiliation, the truth. She had been so sure. She was right, but she had been so very wrong. As she turned to leave, a voice stopped her. You have a choice to make. Lisa turned. Monica stood there. Certain. Lisa swallowed. What choice? Monica studied her. You can either learn from this, she said, or pretend it never happened. Lisa clenched her jaw. And if I do pretend? Monica shrugged. Then one day, you'll be on the wrong side of this conversation again. Lisa stared at her, not sure what to say. Monica didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked away, leaving Lisa standing alone in the empty cabin, thinking, and, for the first time, really listening. Captain Monica Carter didn't just land a plane, she landed a statement. No matter what obstacles stood in her way, she proved that skill, experience, and determination matter more than outdated biases. The sky belongs to everyone. If you enjoyed this story and want more gripping tales filled with unexpected twists, make sure to subscribe to our channel. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to hear from you. See you in the next story.